Forgiveness is challenging. Forgiveness is also one of the main topics in the Bible. Even when it's not explicitly mentioned, it's often one of the main themes. Take, for example, the stories that we read today from the book of Genesis. Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau were twins, twin brothers. Esau was born first, just a few minutes ahead of Jacob. But that small distinction made all the difference in the world in that culture, because the firstborn son was destined to receive the largest part of the father's wealth. Most of the inheritance would go to him because he was the oldest son. He had the birthright. Well, one day Esau is out hunting, and he's out for a long time, and by the time he gets back, he's famished, he's really hungry. And he comes up on his brother Jacob, who's cooking some lentil stew, and Esau asks him for some of the stew. And Jacob says, "Well, brother, if you'll give me your birthright, I'll give you a little something to eat." And Esau, kind of lost in his exhaustion and hunger, says, "What good is my birthright going to do me if I starve to death?" And he passes off his birthright, his share of the inheritance, to his younger brother. His younger brother wheedles that out of him. And of course, later on, Esau is not happy about this. He feels swindled. But it gets even worse, because later on, when Isaac, Jacob and Esau's father, is old and dying and blind, he's ready to give the last thing that he has to Esau, his blessing, the blessing of God that he has, that he could pass on. And so he says to Esau, "Go out and hunt me some nice savory game, exactly what I like. You know what I like." And Esau takes off, and in the meantime, Jacob comes in, steals some of Esau's clothing, dresses up in it, pretends to be Esau, brings some cooked meat to his father Isaac, and says, I'm Esau, bless me, father." And Isaac is fooled, and he blesses Jacob. And Esau is robbed of the last gift of his father. So Esau at this point is completely furious, and he's ready to kill Jacob. So Jacob takes off. He runs away. And then Jacob and Esau don't see each other for decades. And this is the point where we pick up the story that we read today. Jacob is coming back to his homeland, to the land where Esau still lives. And things are really different. Jacob has 2 wives and 2 concubines and 11 sons and a whole bunch of possessions, and he's headed home toward where he grew up. He's headed back to the land where he knows his brother is. And so he sends on ahead of him and his caravan some gifts, some people bearing gifts for Esau, and they come to him first. And eventually Jacob is making his way toward Esau. And Esau has 400 armed men with him. So Jacob, you could see where Jacob might be a little bit leery, thinking this might not go well. So Jacob shows up before Esau. The gifts have come, and Esau accepts Jacob. Esau is not holding a grudge. Esau has done well for himself, and he's not remembering with anger the way that his brother swindled him out of his birthright and his father's blessing. He sees his younger brother Jacob, and he embraces him, and he welcomes him back. He forgives him. And Jacob says to Esau, "Looking on your face is like looking on the face of God, because you have accepted me." That the picture of God is the picture of one who accepts, of one who grants forgiveness, of one who grants grace. And this picture of these 2 brothers reconciling, of the brother who was injured, the brother who was harmed, the brother who was swindled, forgiving his wayward brother when he comes home. The other story that we have, the story of Joseph and his brothers, is another story of remarkable forgiveness. And you remember how that story goes. Joseph is the favored son. He's the second youngest in Jacob's household, the first son of his favorite wife, Rachel, and Jacob just lavishes good things on Joseph. And so his other brothers are naturally resentful. And when Jacob has this dream where he dreams that all of his brothers will be bowing down to him, naturally they get a little upset. And that's when they really start to plot to get rid of him. And so one day when he's out taking care of his father's herd, they beat Joseph up, they throw him into a pit, they're ready to kill him, when one of the brothers, Judah, says, wait a minute, look, there's an Egyptian caravan. Why don't we just sell him into slavery? We'll make a little money, we don't kill him, it's a better option. And so that's exactly what they did. And so Joseph ends up being sold into slavery in Egypt, and through a variety of ups and downs, really more downs than ups until the end of the story, he ends up in prison, and then he ends up in Pharaoh's court. And he ends up second in command of Pharaoh's empire. And so when his brothers come down to Egypt looking for food during a famine, they end up in front of Joseph. But of course, they don't know that it's Joseph, right? They think that Joseph must be dead and buried, pushing up daisies in some Egyptian field by now. But their brother is there waiting for them. And they come to ask for food, and eventually Joseph reveals himself, who he is, gets the whole family to come down into Egypt where he could take care of them. And it seems that all is well. But then Jacob dies, and Joseph's brothers are afraid. They say, what if the fact that Dad was around is the only thing that was keeping Joseph from using this incredible power that he has? I mean, he has the whole Egyptian army behind him. What if the fact that Dad was still alive is the only thing that kept Joseph from just killing us all, from paying us back for all the evil that we did to him? And so after Jacob dies, his brothers come to Joseph and they say, Joseph, well, you know what Dad said right before he died? Dad said that you should forgive us for all the evil that you did to us. Now that's kind of convenient, isn't it? Isn't that convenient? Well, really, Joseph, you weren't there, but what Dad said that we should say to you is that you should forgive us for all that terrible stuff we did to you and every horrible thing that you went through because of us. But the thing is, we really don't know, right? We don't know if Jacob really said that or if they're making it up. It doesn't say in the text. But the thing is Joseph just takes it at face value. And he says, am I God that I would punish you to take your lives? He says, I'll take care of you. I'll take care of you and your children. And they all weep. And Joseph forgives his brothers for the evil that they did to him. Both of those stories are powerful stories of forgiveness, where someone who had been really deeply wronged forgives the person that wronged them. But I think the one thing that makes it easier for the person to forgive, for Esau and Joseph to forgive in these two stories, is that really they are in the position of power when the forgiveness happens, right? In other words, Esau has 400 armed men with him, and he has power. If he really wanted to kill Jacob, he could do it. And Joseph's brothers are completely within his power. He has the entire Egyptian army behind him. He could have them all executed like that. So in some ways, it's easy for them to forgive. Jacob isn't going to be tricking Esau anymore. That's not going to happen. And Joseph's brothers are never going to be able to do any more violence to him. That's not going to happen. Esau and Joseph are in the positions of power. So you say, well, they could have they could be magnanimous. They can forgive from that position. I mean, it's true. They could also wreak terrible vengeance, right? They also could wreak terrible vengeance. They have the power to do that. But they have the power, so they could also be gracious and forgive. I think how much more difficult is it to forgive when the person who has been wronged, the person who has been hurt, is not in a position of power. And isn't that the way it happens so much more often in the world, right? That the person who's been wronged, the person who's been hurt, the person who has had evil done to them, forgives the evildoer even from even when they're not in a position of power, even when they're still in a position of weakness. But how hard that is. How very hard that is. As I was preparing this week, I read another story about the limits and possibility of forgiveness. The story is called The Sunflower. Do any of you remember the name Simon Wiesenthal? Simon Wiesenthal, yeah. Yes, I see a few of you recognize that name. He was known as the Nazi hunter, right? After World War II, he was a concentration camp survivor, and he dedicated his life after the war to tracking down Nazis who had gone into hiding and bringing them to justice, bringing them to trial, having their crimes exposed, and having them face justice. But the story that he tells in The Sunflower is from his days as a concentration camp inmate. So Wiesenthal is in a concentration camp, and one day he and some of the other prisoners are marched out of the camp to a Nazi field hospital. And on the way to the hospital, they pass a military cemetery, and there are all these graves, and there are SS soldiers buried in this cemetery, and on each grave is a sunflower. And Wiesenthal looks at these sunflowers, and he's thinking, I will be buried in an unmarked grave, and there will be no sunflower for me. But for all these Nazis, for these terrible people, they get a sunflower. And he's just, consumed with the injustice, with the unfairness. And so they march these guys to the hospital, and they're there to basically take care of medical waste, to get rid of medical waste. And a nurse comes up to Wiesenthal and says, come with me. And she takes him into this room where there's one dying SS officer. And the SS officer says to Wiesenthal, I sent for a Jew because I wanted to ask for forgiveness from a Jew for all the terrible things that I've done to your people. And this SS officer, he tells him of the things that he's done. He talks about how he grew up and how he was a server in church and how he was dedicated to his church and how he was a good boy and a good student, and how he then got involved with the Hitler Youth and things started to turn, and then he ended up volunteering to serve in the SS, and his parents were not happy about this, but they really couldn't do anything about it. And he talks about what he did and the terrible crime that he committed when he was part of a group of SS soldiers that forced a couple hundred Jewish people into a house and then burned the house down, and anyone who tried to jump out, they shot. And he talks about how he shot a woman and a child trying to escape from the burning house. And he talks about his remorse and his regret and how guilty he feels and how in need of a word of forgiveness. And Wiesenthal just sits there. He's silent. At one point, a fly comes and buzzes around the SS officer's face, which is all bandaged up. He's burned, I suppose, and shoos the fly away. A very human reaction. And the SS officer says, thanks. But Wiesenthal does not offer a word of forgiveness. He just silently walks out. And the question that Wiesenthal asks is, what would you do? What would you do in that situation? And the rest of the book is answers from a variety of people, from other Holocaust survivors, from Christian clergy, from political leaders, from survivors of other genocides. And it's that part of the book really is almost as powerful as the story itself, where people from their own experiences say why Wiesenthal did the right thing and was right to not offer a word of forgiveness. Then there's people who say, how could Wiesenthal offer forgiveness on behalf of those who were murdered? That those who were murdered were the only ones that would have the proper authority to offer forgiveness, and they're gone. So how Wiesenthal did absolutely the right thing, they said. And then there are others who said that this SS officer, obviously he was showing remorse. There was no question that he was repenting. So he should be offered a word of forgiveness so that he could die with a little peace. And it's interesting that that basically the Christians all either kind of reluctantly or tentatively said, yes, I would have offered a word of forgiveness. And I think Bishop Desmond Tutu, the South African archbishop, put it best when he said, the reason that it is possible for Christians to offer a word of forgiveness in that place is because we follow a Jew who offered a word of forgiveness for those who were in the process of brutally killing him on a cross. That Jesus, as he's dying, as he is in the weakest place possible, nailed to a cross, gasping for his last bit of air, he uses that last bit of air to say, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. A prayer for forgiveness. And we who follow that man, the Son of God, we see the way that he came into the world to heal the world, to heal even the evil people with the gift of forgiveness. And we say that is who we follow. May we have that grace. May we be filled with his Spirit so that we might offer forgiveness too. Because the forgiveness that we offer is not really ours. It is the forgiveness that we have already so graciously received from God. Thanks be to God.